History has a way of hiding its darkest corners, leaving the most unsettling stories buried beneath layers of time until now. Picture this: a world where justice wasn't about fairness or mercy, but about sending a message so terrifying it would echo through the ages. Long before prisons or legal systems as we know them, ancient civilizations relied on something far more brutal: execution devices engineered to shock, horrify, and silence anyone who dared defy the rules. These weren't just tools of punishment, they were masterpieces of cruelty, designed to twist pain into spectacle. And the most chilling part, many of these inventions were crafted with such twisted ingenuity, they'd make even the bravest among us shudder. You might think you know the grim tales of the guillotine or the Iron Maiden, but what about the rest? The devices lost to history, the ones too horrifying to mention in classrooms. Behind each one lies a story of power, fear, and the lengths societies would go to maintain control. Some were built to prolong agony, others to humiliate, and a few were so bizarre, they blurred the line between punishment and pure nightmare. Who dreamed these things up? Why did entire civilizations rally around such brutality? And what does it say about us that these inventions existed at all? That's exactly what we're uncovering today. From the spine-chilling to the downright surreal, we're diving into 20 ancient execution devices you've never heard of, each one a window into a world where cruelty was an art form. This isn't just a list, it's a journey through humanity's shadowy past, where every contraption tells a deeper story about fear, power, and the dark side of innovation. So brace yourself, because by the end of this, you'll never look at history the same way again. The Brazen Bull stands as one of history's most horrifying examples of cruelty disguised as innovation. Crafted entirely from bronze, this life-sized bull statue concealed a hollow chamber inside, a space just large enough to hold a single person. But the true horror wasn't just in being trapped within the metal beast. Once the victim was sealed inside, executioners would light a roaring fire beneath it, slowly turning the bull into a monstrous oven. The metal would grow hotter and hotter, roasting the person alive in unbearable agony. But the creators of this device didn't stop at mere physical torture. They engineered it to transform suffering into spectacle. As the victim screamed, the sound would travel through a series of pipes inside the bull, distorting their cries into something unrecognizable, a bellowing roar that mimicked an actual bull. Imagine the psychological terror of the crowd, hearing what sounded like an enraged animal, knowing full well it was a human voice twisted beyond recognition. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about sending a message. The bull's inventor, a Greek sculptor named Perilaus, presented it to the tyrant Phalaris as the ultimate tool of fear. And in a twist of cruel irony, Phalaris allegedly tested it on Perilaus himself, proving that no one was safe from its horrors. What makes the Brazen Bull so chilling isn't just the brutality, it's the calculated craftsmanship behind it. Every detail, from the acoustics to the slow heating of the metal, was designed to maximize suffering while entertaining an audience. This device wasn't just an execution method, it was a symbol. A reminder that power could be as inventive as it was merciless. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, how many other horrors like this have been lost to time, their stories erased but their legacy lingering in the darkest corners of history? If the Brazen Bull represented the horror of sound and fire, the Judas Cradle weaponized silence and gravity in a way that was just as terrifying. Picture a simple wooden pyramid, its sharp tip pointing upward like a spike. But this was no geometric curiosity. Victims would be stripped of clothing, then suspended above the device with ropes, their legs spread wide. Slowly, excruciatingly, they'd be lowered onto that pointed apex, their own body weight driving the pyramid's tip deeper with every passing minute. There was no quick end here. The design ensured the pain stretched on for hours, sometimes days, as the body struggled against the inevitable. What made the Judas Cradle especially sinister was its dual purpose: torture and degradation. The Spanish Inquisition didn't just want to punish, they wanted to break the spirit. By exposing victims and forcing them into such a vulnerable position, the torment wasn't merely physical. It was psychological warfare, a calculated attack on dignity meant to crush resistance. And the message was clear: defiance would be met with unbearable suffering, witnessed by all as a deterrent. Unlike other devices designed for public spectacle, the Judas Cradle often operated behind closed doors in the dimly lit chambers of inquisitors. The absence of an audience didn't soften the brutality. If anything, the isolation amplified the terror. With no distractions, no hope of rescue, victims were left alone with their agony, the pyramid's relentless pressure a constant reminder of their helplessness. Historians still debate whether death came from infection, blood loss, or sheer trauma. But the cradle's true cruelty lay in its ambiguity. It wasn't engineered for efficiency. It was built to linger, to make the victim question how much more they could endure. And in that prolonged suffering, the real punishment revealed itself, not just the pain of the body, but the slow unraveling of the mind. While the Brazen Bull and Judas Cradle relied on spectacle and psychological torment, the Scavenger's daughter took a disturbingly different approach: compression. This deceptively simple device, forged in the shadows of Tudor England, turned the human body against itself. Picture an iron frame shaped like a crouching figure, its metal limbs bent inward like a cage waiting to snap shut. When a victim was forced inside, the mechanism would tighten relentlessly, folding them into a forced fetal position until ribs cracked, joints dislocated, and organs collapsed under the pressure. Unlike the stretching rack which pulled the body apart, this contraption worked in reverse, collapsing the victim inward as if their own skeleton was betraying them. Sir Leonard Skevington, the man who designed this nightmare, wasn't just an executioner, he was an engineer of agony. His invention demonstrated how execution devices had evolved beyond mere brutality. They'd become precision tools for interrogation. The Scavenger's daughter didn't just punish, it persuaded. With every tightening turn of the screws, the device amplified pain while minimizing space, making it horrifically portable. Prisoners could be crushed in dungeons, on battlefields, or even in the back of a cart, their muffled screams drowned out by the creaking metal. What makes this device especially chilling is its duality. On the surface, it seemed almost clinical: no blood, no fire, just cold, calculating pressure. But the reality was far worse. Victims didn't just die from their injuries, they suffocated slowly as their compressed lungs fought for air, or bled internally as their organs failed. And because the damage was largely internal, the Scavenger's daughter left behind a deceptively intact corpse, a macabre illusion that hid the devastation within. This wasn't just torture, it was a perverse reflection of the era's obsession with control. Tudor England was a world where power demanded absolute submission, and devices like this ensured no one forgot the price of defiance. The Scavenger's daughter didn't just break bodies, it shattered wills, proving that sometimes the most terrifying inventions aren't the loudest, they're the ones that work in silence. The breaking wheel took the concept of public execution to horrifying new heights, transforming pain into a meticulously choreographed spectacle. Imagine a massive wooden wheel, its thick spokes radiating outward like the limbs of some monstrous beast. Victims would be tied to the wheel, their arms and legs stretched across its surface, completely vulnerable. Then, with methodical precision, the executioner would raise an iron bar and bring it crashing down not once, but repeatedly, shattering bones one by one. The goal wasn't just to kill, it was to prolong suffering, ensuring each crack of splintering bone echoed through the crowd. What made the wheel uniquely terrifying was its theatricality. Unlike hidden torture devices, this was entertainment in the darkest sense. Whole towns would gather to watch, some even bringing children, as if it were a macabre festival. The victims' screams were part of the show, their broken body left displayed on the wheel for days as a warning to others. And in a grim twist of irony, the only mercy came at a price. If a family could afford to bribe the executioner, the final blow, a crushing strike to the chest would end the agony quickly. But for those without means, death came slowly, under the indifferent gaze of a society that saw brutality as justice. Beyond its physical cruelty, the breaking wheel symbolized something deeper, the absolute power of the state. In medieval Europe, law and order weren't just about punishment, they were about dominance. The wheel's very design, with its circular shape, mirrored the unbreakable cycle of authority. Once you were caught in its grasp, there was no escape. And by making executions public, rulers reinforced a chilling message. Defiance would be met with unimaginable pain, witnessed by all. Yet perhaps the most unsettling legacy of the breaking wheel isn't its violence, but how casually it was accepted. For centuries, people watched these horrors without revolt, even cheered at times. That normalization of cruelty forces us to ask, what does it say about human nature when suffering becomes spectacle? And how many other acts of brutality have we, as a society, quietly endorsed without question? The wheel may be gone, but its shadow lingers, a reminder of how easily justice can twist into something far darker. The Iron Maiden stands as one of history's most misunderstood and most haunting symbols of torture. At first glance, it's hard to look away from that towering iron coffin, its interior lined with row upon row of jagged spikes. The mechanics seem horrifyingly straightforward. Once the door swung shut, those spikes would pierce the victim's flesh, carefully avoiding vital organs to prolong suffering. But here's the twist: historians now believe the Iron Maiden, as we imagine it, might never have existed in medieval times. Instead, its terrifying reputation likely grew from later exaggerations, a blend of myth and macabre storytelling that cemented its place in our collective nightmares. So why does this device still grip our imagination centuries later? Maybe it's the chilling precision of its design, a fusion of artistry and cruelty that feels almost theatrical. Unlike the crude brutality of the breaking wheel or the fiery spectacle of the Brazen Bull, the Iron Maiden presents torture as something calculated, almost elegant. Every spike is placed with purpose, every scream drawn out with methodical control. It's a reminder that fear isn't just about pain, it's about anticipation, the dreadful knowledge of what's coming next. But there's another layer to its legend. The Iron Maiden's disputed history makes it even more unsettling. Was it a real tool of torment, or a fabrication dreamed up to shock and terrify? Some accounts suggest similar devices may have been used sparingly in Germany, while others argue it was purely a product of Gothic fascination, a symbol conjured to embody the darkest fears of a bygone era. That ambiguity only deepens its power, because whether real or imagined, the Iron Maiden forces us to confront a disturbing truth. Sometimes the idea of suffering can be just as potent as the suffering itself. And perhaps that's the real horror behind this device. It represents humanity's endless capacity to invent new ways to inflict pain, not just on the body, but on the mind. The Iron Maiden isn't just a relic of the past, it's a mirror reflecting our own fascination with the boundaries of fear and the shadows of history we can't quite escape. The Pair of Anguish might sound almost whimsical by name, but its reality was anything but. Shaped like a blunt metal fruit, this unassuming device concealed a mechanism of pure horror. When inserted into one of the body's most vulnerable openings, mouth, rectum, or vagina, a simple turn of a screw would cause its segmented lobes to slowly expand outward, tearing flesh and shattering dignity in equal measure. Unlike other execution devices built for public spectacle, the pair was designed for intimate brutality, its effects hidden from view but no less devastating. What made this tool especially sinister was its chilling versatility. Torturers could adjust the pressure with precision, choosing between swift mutilation or prolonged torment. For accused heretics, it became a grotesque metaphor, their bodies forced to open to confession, whether truthful or fabricated. Women branded as witches endured it as punishment for their so-called sins, the device weaponizing misogyny into physical agony. Even its name carried cruel irony, the pair symbolizing fertility and nourishment, twisted into something meant to destroy. Beyond its physical damage, the Pair of Anguish revealed how execution devices often doubled as tools of social control. Its targets weren't chosen at random, they were selected to reinforce hierarchies and fears. By focusing on bodily orifices associated with speech, sexuality, or shame, torturers sent a clear message. Defiance would be met with violations meant to strip away identity itself. A blasphemer's mouth, once used to challenge authority, could be rendered forever silent. A woman's body, accused of witchcraft, could be brutalized under the guise of purging evil. Perhaps most unsettling is how this device reflects a pattern seen across history, the way violence becomes tailored to its victims. The pair wasn't just about inflicting pain, it was about humiliation so specific, it left no doubt who held power. And in that specificity, we see a darker truth. Execution devices were never just about justice. They were about crafting suffering to fit the prejudices of the era, a reminder that cruelty often wears the mask of order. The Pair of Anguish may be a relic of the past, but the mindset behind it, that's harder to leave behind. The Catherine wheel turned suffering into sacred theater, a twisted marriage of faith and brutality that captivated crowds for centuries. Named after Saint Catherine of Alexandria, a martyr said to have been miraculously spared the wheel's agony before her eventual beheading, this device weaponized religious symbolism to make cruelty feel ordained. Victims were lashed to a massive wooden wheel, their limbs splayed across its spokes like offerings. Then came the hammer, swung with deliberate force to shatter bones without delivering a fatal blow. The message was clear: pain wasn't just punishment, it was purification. What set the Catherine wheel apart was its duality. Unlike the breaking wheel, which focused on public spectacle alone, this device wrapped violence in a veneer of holiness. By invoking Saint Catherine's legend, executioners framed each crack of bone as part of a divine script. The victim's broken body, left to rot on the wheel or set ablaze, became a grotesque sermon, a warning that earthly suffering paled next to the wrath of heaven. Crowds didn't just watch, they participated in a perverse ritual where agony was spun into moral instruction. Yet beneath the religious pageantry lurked something far darker, a system desperate to legitimize its violence. Medieval Europe thrived on order, and nothing threatened that order like dissent. The Catherine wheel offered rulers a way to crush rebellion while claiming celestial approval. Heretics, criminals, even political rivals could be transformed into cautionary tales, their screams sanctified by tradition. It was psychological mastery, the fusion of fear and faith, making resistance seem not just futile but blasphemous. Perhaps the most haunting legacy of the Catherine Wheel isn't its brutality, but how effortlessly it convinced people to look away. When pain is dressed as piety, cruelty becomes communion. And that's the real horror, not the device itself, but the ease with which entire societies accepted it, whispering prayers as the hammer fell. The saw torture redefined cruelty by turning gravity into an accomplice. Imagine being suspended upside down, your ankles bound as the world tilts into dizzying unreality. Then comes the saw-coarse teeth biting into flesh with agonizing slowness, starting at the most vulnerable point. This wasn't just execution, it was a grotesque science experiment, leveraging anatomy to prolong suffering. With blood pooling in the brain, victims remained conscious far longer than nature intended, forced to endure every inch of the blade's progress. What set this method apart wasn't just the physical torment, it was the theatricality. In medieval Europe and the Middle East, sawing became a performance, its pace deliberately unhurried to maximize crowd engagement. Each pull of the saw drew gasps or cheers, the victim's muffled screams merging with the rasp of metal on bone. For accusations like witchcraft or treason, the spectacle served dual purposes, punishing the condemned while branding their crimes into public memory. The saw didn't just kill, it narrated, its rhythmic motion etching a story of consequences. Yet the true horror lay in the psychology behind the design. Unlike swift beheadings or crushing wheels, the saw forced victims to confront their own mortality in real time. Strapped helplessly, they'd watch the blade creep upward, knowing exactly where it would pause, often stopping just short of vital organs to stretch the ordeal. This calculated hesitation transformed pain into existential dread, making the saw as much a weapon of the mind as of the body. Historians note its use was often tied to crimes perceived as unnatural: witchcraft, heresy, betrayal. The inverted position itself carried symbolism, a literal upending of the social order, as if the act of cutting mirrored the severing of trust. Even the tool was significant. Saws were common implements, repurposed to remind onlookers that ordinary objects could become instruments of terror in the wrong hands. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the saw torture is how it reveals the creativity of cruelty. Humanity's darkest innovations weren't just about efficiency, they were about spectacle, messaging, and the warping of natural processes. The saw didn't merely end lives, it weaponized time itself, proving that in the hands of those hungry for control, even gravity could be twisted into an agent of suffering. The Blood Eagle stands apart even among history's most brutal execution methods, not just for its violence, but for its chilling theatricality. Picture this: a victim, often a captured enemy or traitor, is restrained face down as a blade traces the outline of their spine. Then comes the meticulous work, ribs hacked free from the backbone, one by one, until the cavity of the chest gapes open. But the horror doesn't end there. The executioner would reach inside, pulling the lungs outward like macabre wings, draping them over the splayed ribs. The result, a living, gashing display of agony, the victim's own breath inflating those grotesque wings until death finally intervened. What makes the Blood Eagle so haunting isn't just the physical torment, it's the symbolism woven into every cut. Norse sagas describe it as the ultimate act of vengeance, reserved for those who betrayed kinship or honor. By transforming the body into a twisted homage to Odin's sacred bird, the eagle, the ritual blurred the line between execution and dark artistry. This wasn't merely punishment, it was a statement carved in flesh, a declaration that some crimes demanded suffering so extreme, it defied mortal comprehension. Yet historians still clash over whether the Blood Eagle was historical fact or myth amplified by legend. Some argue the sagas exaggerated the practice for dramatic effect, while others point to archaeological evidence. like the peculiar rib fractures found on certain Viking-era skeletons as grim corroboration. Whether literal or embellished, the Blood Eagle's persistence in lore reveals something deeper, the Viking world's fixation on reputation. Even if rarely performed, the mere threat of such a fate would have been enough to enforce loyalty, its horror magnified by whispered tales around firelight. And that's the true power of this method. Like the Brazen Bull or the Iron Maiden, the Blood Eagle transcends its physical form to become something larger, a symbol of how far societies will go to codify fear. It forces us to ask, when does justice become spectacle? When does retribution cross into something darker, where pain is no longer a means to an end, but the end itself? The Blood Eagle may belong to the past, but the questions it raises linger, sharp as any Viking blade. The bamboo torture weaponized patience itself, turning nature's quiet persistence into an instrument of unbearable agony. Imagine being bound motionless above a bed of young bamboo shoots, each stalk meticulously sharpened to a needle-like point. At first, nothing happens, just the eerie stillness of waiting. But bamboo is one of the fastest-growing plants on Earth, capable of sprouting several inches in a single day. Slowly, inevitably, those tender green spears begin their upward push, first brushing the skin, then puncturing it with excruciating precision. This wasn't an execution, it was a grotesque collaboration between human ingenuity and the unstoppable force of the natural world. What made this method uniquely horrifying wasn't just the physical pain, it was the psychological torment of anticipation. Victims could feel every subtle shift as the bamboo inched closer, knowing exactly what was coming yet powerless to stop it. Unlike the sudden violence of a blade or the roaring heat of the Brazen Bull, the bamboo worked in silence, its progress measured in days rather than moments. The very slowness of the process amplified the suffering, each millimeter of growth a reminder that escape was impossible. Historians believe this technique was employed in parts of Asia, particularly during periods of warfare or political purges, where its prolonged nature served as a deterrent. The bamboo didn't just kill, it made death a spectacle of inevitability. By the time the shoots had fully penetrated the body, often emerging through the torso or limbs, the victim's fate was sealed not by the hand of an executioner, but by the relentless march of time itself. Yet the bamboo torture also reveals a darker truth about how societies weaponize the environment. Fire, metal, and blades were tools humans crafted for violence, but bamboo required no invention, just observation and cruel creativity. It forced victims to confront their own fragility against the indifferent strength of nature, a lesson as old as humanity itself. And in that grim lesson lies the method's real power, the realization that sometimes the most terrifying forces aren't those we create, but those we simply harness. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this practice is how it mirrors the very essence of fear, the dread of the inevitable, the slow creep of something you can't outrun. The bamboo didn't need to be brutal, it just needed to be patient, and in that patience it found a cruelty all its own. The Spanish Tickler weaponized touch itself, turning the most basic human sensation into a source of unimaginable torment. Picture a claw-like instrument, its multiple prongs each ending in tiny, hooked blades not designed to stab or slice cleanly, but to catch and lift. When dragged across bare skin, those hooks would latch onto flesh, allowing the torturer to peel it away in ragged strips with agonizing precision. This wasn't about efficiency, it was about control. Each pull of the tool could be adjusted slow and deliberate to maximize suffering, or quick and erratic to amplify shock and unpredictability. What set the Spanish Tickler apart wasn't just the physical mutilation, it was the psychological horror embedded in its very name. Victims weren't merely flayed, they were subjected to a grotesque parody of pleasure, their bodies reacting involuntarily to the tickling sensation even as their skin was torn from muscle. The device played a cruel game with human reflexes, exploiting the body's instinctive response to light touch and twisting it into something monstrous. Laughter and screams became indistinguishable, a macabre symphony that unsettled even hardened observers. Historians trace its use primarily to the Spanish Inquisition, where it served as both punishment and interrogation tool. Unlike the Judas Cradle or the Pair of Anguish, which targeted specific vulnerabilities, the Tickler's versatility made it a favorite for extracting confessions. Torturers could focus on less lethal areas, the arms, legs, or back, prolonging the ordeal without immediate fatality. The slow removal of skin also carried symbolic weight, as if stripping away not just flesh but identity itself. A confessant might emerge alive but forever marked, their scars a public testament to the price of defiance. Yet the true ingenuity of the Spanish Tickler lay in its duality. Like the Brazen Bull's acoustics or the Bamboo Torture's natural cruelty, this device showcased how the most inventive minds of the era channeled creativity into suffering. It wasn't enough to harm, the pain had to be layered with humiliation, the very language of its name mocking the victim's helplessness. And in that mockery, we see the darkest truth of these devices. They weren't just tools of justice, but weapons of dehumanization, designed to break not just bodies but spirits. Perhaps the most unsettling legacy of the Spanish Tickler is how it reflects a pattern seen across cultures, the way societies weaponize everyday sensations. Just as the bamboo torture turned growth into agony, the Tickler perverted touch, one of humanity's most fundamental comforts, into an instrument of terror. It forces us to ask, what other ordinary experiences have been twisted into tools of control? And how thin is the line between civilization and cruelty when innovation serves not to heal, but to harm? The Heretics Fork was a masterpiece of psychological torment disguised as simplicity. Picture a small metal tool no larger than a hand with two sharp prongs at each end, one resting against the sternum, the other pressing into the soft flesh beneath the chin. At first glance, it might seem almost harmless compared to the gruesome spectacle of the breaking wheel or the Brazen Bull. But that was the point. This device didn't rely on blood or fire to break its victims. It weaponized something far more universal, the human need for rest. Strapped into place, the condemned couldn't lower their head without driving the upper prong into their throat or the lower into their chest. Movement became impossible. Sleep was unthinkable. Death didn't come from a single act of violence, but from days of relentless exhaustion, the body and mind unraveling hour by hour. What made the Heretics Fork especially insidious was its precision in targeting intellectuals and free thinkers. Unlike devices meant for public display, this was a tool of quiet oppression, often used during the Spanish Inquisition to silence those who questioned dogma. The fork didn't just punish the body, it starved the intellect. By denying sleep, it eroded clarity of thought, leaving victims delirious and disoriented, their rebellion fading along with their consciousness. It was a cruel irony, a device meant to stifle ideas, shaped like the very utensil used to feed. But the real horror lay in its isolation. Unlike the crowds that gathered for the Catherine Wheel or the Breaking Wheel, victims of the Heretics Fork suffered alone, often in darkened cells where time blurred into unending torment. There were no spectators to witness their defiance, no one to hear their final words. The fork turned the body into its own prison, a cage where every instinct to rest, to surrender, to scream became a trap. Historians note that the fork's design was almost elegant in its cruelty. No complex mechanisms, no elaborate setup, just cold metal and the weight of exhaustion. It was a reminder that sometimes the most effective tools of control aren't the loudest or the bloodiest. They're the ones that turn the mind against itself, leaving no visible scars but hollowing the spirit from within. And perhaps that's the most unsettling legacy of the Heretics Fork. It wasn't just a device, it was a metaphor, a symbol of how power, when threatened by ideas, doesn't just seek to silence, it seeks to dismantle, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the echo of what once was. In the end, the fork didn't just kill, it erased, and in that erasure, it revealed the darkest truth of all, that some punishments aren't about justice, but about the annihilation of thought itself. The lead sprinkler redefined cruelty with a perverse elegance, transforming liquid metal into an instrument of prolonged, calculated agony. Unlike the blunt force of the breaking wheel or the visceral tearing of the Spanish Tickler, this method turned pain into something almost theatrical. Picture a victim bound motionless as a torturer, clad in thick gloves, carefully heated lead or oil until it shimmered like liquid silver. Then, with the precision of a painter crafting brushstrokes, they'd pour the molten substance in thin streams starting at the feet or hands, areas packed with nerve endings but less likely to kill instantly. Each splash seared flesh with a sickening hiss, the skin blistering and blackening as the metal cooled into grotesque sculptures of suffering. What made the lead sprinkler uniquely horrifying wasn't just the heat, it was the artistry behind it. Executioners weren't merely inflicting pain, they were conducting it, adjusting the flow like maestros orchestrating a symphony of screams. A slow drizzle prolonged torment for hours, while a sudden deluge could overwhelm the senses, leaving victims catatonic before death claimed them. This wasn't random violence, it was performance, designed to showcase the torturer's control over life and death itself. Historians trace its use to medieval Europe, where public executions doubled as morality plays. Crowds gathered not just to witness justice, but to revel in the spectacle of suffering as a deterrent. The lead sprinkler's visual drama, the glowing metal, the rising steam, the victim's contorted limbs, made it a favorite for crimes like heresy or treason, where the punishment needed to match the perceived severity of the offense. It was a reminder that defiance could melt away as easily as flesh under molten lead. Yet beneath the spectacle lay a darker truth. The lead sprinkler was as much about psychology as physics. Victims weren't just burned, they were forced to anticipate each pour, their terror mounting with every second the torturer paused, tilting the crucible teasingly. The unpredictability amplified the agony, turning time itself into a weapon. And when the metal finally struck, the pain wasn't a single burst, it was layered, each new pour reigniting the wounds beneath as fresh metal fused with charred tissue. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this device is how it mirrors humanity's capacity to innovate in service of cruelty. Fire and metal existed for millennia, but it took a certain kind of imagination to combine them into something so meticulously brutal. The lead sprinkler didn't just kill, it transformed suffering into a craft, proving that even the most elemental forces could be bent to the will of those who ruled through fear. Its legacy isn't just in the scars it left behind, but in the unsettling question it forces us to ask: what other ordinary materials have been twisted into tools of torment? And how thin is the line between creativity and cruelty when power goes unchecked? The rat torture weaponized nature's most primal instinct, survival, and turned it into a nightmare. Imagine lying helpless as a metal cage, its bars just wide enough to allow movement, is secured tightly over your abdomen. Inside, a writhing mass of starving rats, their claws scrabbling against your skin. Then comes the heat, a torch or hot coals placed atop the cage, driving the frantic animals downward away from the searing metal. With nowhere else to go, their sharp teeth and claws tear into soft flesh, gnawing deeper and deeper in a desperate bid to escape the heat. This wasn't just execution, It was a grotesque collaboration between human cruelty and animal desperation, where biology became an accomplice to agony. What made this method uniquely horrifying wasn't just the physical violation, it was the psychological torment of anticipation. Victims could feel the rat's frantic movements, their tiny hearts pounding against their own skin moments before the first bite. Unlike devices that relied on human executioners, the rat torture outsourced suffering to creatures acting on pure instinct, stripping away any pretense of control or reason. The rats weren't malicious, they were terrified, their natural drive to survive hijacked to inflict unbearable pain. This blurred the line between predator and prey, leaving victims trapped in a perverse reversal of the natural order. Historians trace this technique's use to multiple eras, from medieval Europe to colonial punishments, where its slow, visceral nature served as a potent deterrent. For crimes like treason or heresy, the rat torture sent a chilling message. Defiance would be met with a fate so degrading, it reduced humans to mere sustenance. The prolonged nature of the ordeal, sometimes lasting hours, allowed spectators to witness the grim spectacle, the victims' screams mingling with the rats' squeals as they burrowed inward. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the rat torture was its symbolism. Rats, long associated with filth and disease, became agents of judgment, their very presence amplifying the victim's humiliation. This wasn't just about pain, it was about dehumanization, a reminder that even the lowliest creatures could be weaponized against those who challenged authority. And in that symbolism, we see the darkest ingenuity of execution devices their ability to twist the natural world into something monstrous, leaving no doubt who held the power to redefine life and death. The rat torture forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Cruelty doesn't always require elaborate machinery. Sometimes it's enough to harness fear itself, both the victims and the animals, to create a horror that lingers long after the last rat has fled. The coffin torture turned the human body into its own prison, trapping victims in a nightmare of claustrophobia and public humiliation. Picture a metal cage, just inches taller and wider than the person forced inside its bars, pressing against flesh at every angle. Once the door slammed shut, there was no shifting position, no relief from the relentless pressure of confinement. But the true cruelty wasn't just in the cramped space, it was in the spectacle. These cages were often hung in town squares or marketplaces, leaving victims exposed to the elements and the jeers of passers-by. Sun scorched their skin by day, frost bit at their limbs by night, and all the while the crowd's taunts echoed in their ears, a relentless reminder that their suffering was entertainment. What set the coffin torture apart was its psychological precision. Unlike devices designed to inflict rapid, overwhelming pain, this method weaponized time and visibility. Victims could last for days, their thirst and exhaustion mounting as the world carried on around them. Children might poke sticks through the bars, merchants would haggle over goods just feet away, indifferent to the dying figure in their midst. The message was clear: defiance didn't just earn punishment, it earned erasure, a slow transformation from person to public nuisance. Historians note its use during the medieval period, particularly for crimes like theft or blasphemy, where the punishment needed to serve as a community-wide lesson. The coffin's design stripped away dignity in a way no blade or flame could. There were no heroic last stands, no dramatic final words, just a gradual withering, a life reduced to a cautionary tale. And in that reduction lay its power. The cage wasn't just a container, it was a stage, framing the victim's decline for maximum impact. Yet the most unsettling aspect of the coffin torture wasn't the physical suffering, it was the communal participation. Unlike the secrecy of the Judas Cradle or the private horrors of the Heretics Fork, This device required an audience. It normalized cruelty, turning neighbors into bystanders and bystanders into accomplices. The real torture wasn't just the metal pressing inward. It was the humanity pressing outward, the collective decision to look away or laugh. Perhaps that's the device's most enduring legacy. It reveals how easily suffering can become routine when shared among a crowd. The coffin didn't just trap the victim, it exposed the society that built it, holding up a mirror to the casual brutality of everyday complicity. And in that reflection, we're forced to ask, what cages do we ignore today, simply because they're hidden in plain sight? The head crusher stands as one of history's most chilling examples of how execution devices transformed the human body into a canvas for calculated horror. Picture a metal helmet, its rough interior lined with spikes, clamped over a victim's skull. At first, the pressure might have felt like little more than an uncomfortable grip, but then came the slow, deliberate turn of the screw. Each rotation tightened the device incrementally, the spikes biting into bone as the skull itself began to fracture under the force. Teeth shattered, exploding from the jaw like shrapnel. Eyes bulged grotesquely from their sockets, their capillaries bursting under the mounting pressure. And finally, with one last turn, the cranium would give way entirely, the brain spilling out in a gruesome finale. What set the head crusher apart wasn't just its brutality, it was the cold, methodical precision behind it. Unlike the chaotic violence of the breaking wheel or the fiery spectacle of the Brazen Bull, this device operated with almost surgical control. Executioners could pause at any moment, loosening the screw to prolong the agony or tightening it just enough to elicit a confession. The victim's own anatomy became a bargaining chip, their survival hinging on words spoken through shattered teeth. It was psychological warfare disguised as mechanics, a reminder that pain could be quantified, measured, and weaponized to the ounce. Historians trace its use primarily during the medieval and early modern periods, where it served as both punishment and interrogation tool. For crimes like heresy or treason, the head crusher offered a grim efficiency. It left no room for heroic last stands or defiant speeches. The very act of speaking became a struggle, the jawbone splintering under its own weight. And in that silence, the device's true power revealed itself. It didn't just break bones, it broke wills, reducing even the most resolute individuals to desperate pleas. Yet the most unsettling aspect of the head crusher lies in its symbolism. The head, long considered the seat of reason and identity, was reduced to a fragile plaything, its destruction a spectacle of absolute dominance. By targeting the very organ that housed thought and memory, torturers sent an unmistakable message. Defiance would be met with the annihilation of self. There was no martyrdom here, no legacy of courage, just a broken body and a silenced mind. Perhaps what lingers most hauntingly about this device is its quiet intimacy. Unlike the roaring crowds of the Catherine Wheel or the public display of the Coffin Torture, the head crusher often operated in shadowed chambers, its horrors witnessed by only a handful. In that secrecy, it became something far darker, a tool not just for punishment but for erasure. Because when the final turn of the screw came, it wasn't just a life that ended. It was a story crushed into oblivion along with the skull that once held it. The Wheelbarrow Execution redefined suffering with its unsettling blend of simplicity and sadistic precision. Imagine being forced into a wooden wheelbarrow, your limbs strapped to its edges, utterly exposed. There was no dramatic contraption, no elaborate mechanism, just the crude efficiency of a tool repurposed for horror. As the wheelbarrow rolled forward, the executioner's blade would begin its work, methodically removing fingers, toes, and limbs in a sequence designed to prolong consciousness. Each cut was deliberate, spaced just far enough apart to let the shock subside before the next wave of agony hit. This wasn't just about ending a life, it was about dismantling it piece by piece, in full view of an audience that watched as much for the spectacle as for the lesson it carried. What set this method apart was its chilling intimacy. Unlike the grand theatrics of the Brazen Bull or the Breaking Wheel, the Wheelbarrow Execution felt almost personal. The executioner wasn't hidden behind a mask of machinery. They stood inches from their victim, their skill measured not in speed but in restraint. A master torturer could stretch the ordeal for hours, leaving just enough flesh and bone to keep the victim teetering on the edge of survival. The wheelbarrow itself became a grotesque metaphor, a vessel meant for carrying life's necessities, now hauling death in slow motion. Historians trace its use to ancient China, where it served as punishment for crimes like treason or rebellion. The message was clear: defiance would be met with disintegration, the body itself erased in stages, but the wheelbarrow's true cruelty lay in its duality. For the crowd, it was a performance, a grisly demonstration of authority's reach. For the victim, it was a relentless countdown, each slice a reminder of how much more could be taken before darkness finally intervened. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this device was its psychological warfare. Victims weren't just dying, they were participating in their own annihilation, forced to witness their body being unmade. The wheelbarrow's design ensured they couldn't look away, couldn't escape the reality of what was happening to them. And in that helplessness, the execution achieved its deepest goal, not just to punish, but to obliterate the very idea of resistance. The wheelbarrow execution forces us to confront a haunting truth. Sometimes the most terrifying tools aren't the ones engineered for complexity, but those that twist everyday objects into instruments of despair. It wasn't the blade that carried the real power. It was the wheelbarrow, a mundane object forever stained by the echoes of screams it once carried. The boiling execution turned one of humanity's most basic survival tools, the cooking pot, into a vessel of unspeakable cruelty. Picture a massive cauldron, its contents bubbling ominously as victims were lowered inch by inch into the scalding liquid. But this wasn't just about immersion, it was about calibration. Executioners could adjust the heat with chilling precision, choosing between a rapid, searing death or a slow, agonizing simmer that prolonged suffering for hours. The very act of cooking, something so fundamental to human life, became a grotesque parody of nourishment, with the victim's own body treated like nothing more than ingredients in a monstrous recipe. What set this method apart wasn't just the physical torment. It was the theatrical sadism woven into every stage. Historical accounts describe executioners in medieval Europe and feudal Asia casually dining near the cauldrons, their mock banquets a deliberate psychological assault. The smell of food mingling with the stench of burning flesh, the sound of laughter over the victim's screams, it was a spectacle designed to dehumanize, to reduce a person's final moments to a macabre dinner theater. In some cases, crowds would even place bets on how long the condemned could endure, turning mortal agony into perverse entertainment. The choice of liquid added another layer of horror. Water, while excruciating, killed relatively quickly as the lungs filled with steam. Oil or tar, however, clung to the skin, cooking the body from the outside in while prolonging consciousness. In Japan, this method, known as ushioki, was reserved for crimes like treason, where the extended suffering served as a public declaration of the shogunate's absolute power. Meanwhile, in Tudor England, boiling became a punishment for poisoners, a grim irony where the tool of their crime became the instrument of their demise. Yet the most unsettling aspect of boiling executions was their chilling accessibility. Unlike elaborate devices like the Brazen Bull or the Iron Maiden, This method required no specialized craftsmanship, just fire and a pot. That simplicity made it a favorite among rulers who valued terror over technology. It sent a clear message: even the most mundane objects could be weaponized, and no one was safe from the creativity of those in power. Perhaps what lingers most hauntingly is how this practice mirrors humanity's darkest contradictions. The cauldron, a symbol of community and sustenance across cultures, was twisted into something monstrous. It forces us to confront how easily the tools of life can become instruments of death, and how thin the line between civilization and brutality truly is when fear takes hold. The boiling pot wasn't just an execution device, it was a mirror reflecting the capacity for cruelty that lurks beneath even the most ordinary surfaces. The flaying knife turned the human body into a living tapestry of suffering, where pain and artistry intertwined in the most grotesque way imaginable. Unlike the blunt force of hammers or the scorching heat of molten metal, this method required a torturer's steady hand and an almost surgical precision. The blade would make its first incision often at the wrists or ankles, peeling back skin in thin, deliberate strips like bark from a tree. Victims remained conscious through much of the ordeal, their nerves screaming as layers of flesh were methodically separated from muscle. This wasn't just about ending a life, it was about unmasking it, reducing a person to raw, trembling vulnerability in full view of an audience. What set flaying apart from other execution methods was its chilling duality. In some cultures, like the Aztec Empire, the practice carried religious significance. Priests would don the flayed skins of sacrificial victims, symbolizing rebirth and the cyclical nature of life and death. The skin itself became a sacred relic, a paradox where brutality and spirituality collided. Yet in medieval Europe, flayed hides were nailed to city gates or stretched across shields as warnings, a grisly billboard advertising the consequences of defiance. The same act could be either ritual or intimidation, depending on who wielded the knife and why. The psychological torment was as calculated as the physical agony. Flaying wasn't a swift descent into darkness. It was a slow unraveling, both literal and metaphorical. Victims were forced to confront their own disintegration, watching as the very boundary between themselves and the world was stripped away. And for onlookers, the spectacle was equally disturbing. The body, something so familiar, became alien, a pulsing, bleeding canvas that challenged the very definition of humanity. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of flaying was its legacy. Unlike devices that rusted away or were lost to time, the practice left behind a tangible record. Accounts describe tapestries stitched from human skin, parchment made from it, even garments worn as trophies. These artifacts forced societies to carry the weight of their cruelty forward, long after the screams had faded. The flaying knife didn't just kill, it transformed, leaving behind a remnant that whispered of pain centuries later. In the end, this method forces us to ask where the line between art and atrocity truly lies. Because flaying wasn't just violence, it was a perverse craft, one that demanded skill, patience, and a willingness to see the body not as a person, but as a medium. And in that transformation, it revealed a truth far darker than any blade. That cruelty, when refined enough, can masquerade as something far more disturbing tradition. The Impalement Stake redefined terror as both an art form and a political weapon, its brutality matched only by the chilling precision of its execution. Picture a towering wooden stake, sharpened to a wicked point and anchored firmly in the earth. Victims weren't merely stabbed, they were lowered onto the spike with calculated slowness, their body weight driving the wood upward through the torso, often missing vital organs to prolong the agony. Some survived for days, suspended in a grotesque limbo between life and death, their suffering on full display for all to witness. This wasn't just an execution, it was a performance, a theater of cruelty where every gasp and twitch played to an audience of terrified onlookers. What set impalement apart was its masterful manipulation of physics and anatomy. The angle of the stake could mean the difference between a swift end and a drawn-out nightmare. A vertical spike might pierce the heart or lungs quickly, while a shallow, upward tilt could curve the wood through the abdomen, avoiding major arteries and leaving the victim conscious for hours. In some cases, the stake even emerged through the mouth or shoulder, a macabre flourish designed to amplify the spectacle. The method's inventor, or at least its most infamous practitioner, was Vlad the Impaler, whose very name became synonymous with this gruesome technique. For Vlad, impalement wasn't just punishment, it was propaganda. Forests of stakes lined roads leading into his territory, each corpse a silent ambassador of his ruthlessness, deterring enemies and crushing dissent without a single battle. But the true horror of impalement lay in its psychological warfare. Unlike the hidden torments of the Heretics Fork or the lead sprinkler, this was a public declaration of power. The stakes were often arranged in intricate pattern circles, spirals, even geometric designs, transforming human suffering into a perverse art installation. Crowds couldn't look away, their revulsion mingling with morbid fascination as the condemned writhed under the sun. The message was unmistakable. Defiance would be met with a fate so grotesque it would sear itself into collective memory. Historians note that impalement's legacy extended far beyond Vlad's reign. Ancient Assyrians used it to terrify rebellious cities, while Ottoman forces employed it during sieges to break enemy morale. Its effectiveness wasn't just in the pain it caused, but in the stories it spawned. Tales of the stake forests spread faster than any army, weakening opposition before a single sword was drawn. The method's theatricality made it unforgettable, a lesson written not in ink, but in flesh and splintered wood. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of impalement is how it reflects the darkest corners of human ingenuity. This wasn't mindless violence, it was violence refined to its most potent form, where every scream served a purpose and every stake carried a message. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that terror, when wielded with enough creativity, can be as precise as it is brutal. And in that precision, we see the shadow of something far older than Vlad, the understanding that fear, when crafted carefully, outlives even the screams of its victims. From the Brazen Bull to the Impalement Stake, these 20 execution devices reveal humanity's capacity for cruelty in the name of justice, power, or fear. Each invention reflects the darkest corners of history, where pain wasn't just inflicted, it was engineered with chilling creativity. The minds behind these devices weren't mere brutes, they were innovators, twisting physics, anatomy, and even nature itself into tools of torment. But what's most unsettling isn't just the brutality, it's the intent. These weren't random acts of violence. They were spectacles, warnings, and sometimes even perverse forms of entertainment, all designed to bend societies to the will of those in power. Yet these horrors also force us to confront an uncomfortable question. How far have we truly come? The methods may have changed, but the underlying impulses, control, deterrence, the need to make examples of the defiant still echo in modern justice systems. Public executions have faded, but public shaming thrives in digital town squares. Torture devices are relics, yet psychological torment persists in subtler forms. The tools evolve, but the shadows remain. This journey through history's darkest inventions isn't just about shock or morbid curiosity. It's a mirror reflecting how easily cruelty can be systematized when fear takes hold. And perhaps that's the most vital lesson hidden in these grim artifacts. The line between civilization and barbarity is thinner than we'd like to admit. The real measure of progress isn't just the absence of these devices, it's whether we've learned to recognize the same impulses in ourselves. So what do you think? Do these ancient horrors feel distant, or do they reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature that still linger? Share your thoughts below, and if you're hungry for more untold stories from history's hidden corners, don't forget to subscribe. The past has plenty more shadows left to explore.